Hey guys, Tech Rally here, and excited to introduce this new lesson series called How I See Code. The purpose of this series is to help aspiring and junior developers get some insight on how a software engineer interprets code. We're going to be starting from ground zero by learning HTML and CSS, and then transition into JavaScript. By no means is this going to be a comprehensive list, but my hope is that it'll clear up some air regarding some questions you might have regarding HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and just web development or software engineering in general. The first lesson I want to focus on is HTML. HTML is also known as Hypertext Markup Language, and it's one of the most basic building blocks of building web. It defines the meaning and structure of web content. Other technologies besides HTML are generally used to describe a web page's appearances, like CSS, and the functionality, which is JavaScript. In short, HTML is one of three foundations to build web applications. Let's write some code to show you how HTML works. I'm going to be opening up my terminal. In my terminal, I am in a directory called How I See Code, and in here, I'm going to create a directory called HTML. So mkdir HTML. I'm going to cd into it, and then I'm going to create my first file. So touch index.html. And I'm going to open that using my Visual Studio Code editor. Here in the index.html is where we're going to start creating our first basic layout for our HTML file. The first thing we're going to do is create the Doctype Html. And what this represents is it tells the browser what version of HTML you're using. We don't really need to worry about this one too much, so I'll just skip that one. The next thing we're going to do is create a HTML tag. And you'll notice that when I created that HTML tag, there's always going to be a corresponding enclosing tag here. The HTML tag, surprisingly enough, tells the browser that it is a HTML document. And in our HTML document is where we could put the head and body. Let's go over the head tag first. And I'm going to add a title tag here and say this is the title of the browser. And when I save it, it's going to show up on the browser in the tab of your web browser page. And we can go onto our terminal here. In our terminal, I'm going to write open index.html and then press enter. In our browser, you can see that the text that we added in the title tag is showing up here. If I go back to the code and I remove this is and just say the title, go back to our browser and I refresh the page, the title of the tab changes. So the head tag is generally where you're going to put a bit of boilerplate, whether it's script tags or some CSS stuff. But for now, I thought this was just a little tidbit to show you how the head tag works. To show the body of a website, what we need is the body tag. We can generate the body tag by including the word body. Apologize. Awesome. And then the next thing we're going to do here is I'm going to create a p tag here and just say this is a paragraph tag. I'm going to save this and then show you what it looks like on the browser. When I refresh the page, you'll see that this is a paragraph tag is showing up on the browser when we refresh. I like to view the paragraph tag equivalent to writing text inside of a Word document. The paragraph tag will generally be used when supplying information to a user. The next thing I want to talk about are header tags. Header tags are used to define HTML headings from H1 to H6. I like to think of header tags as text that needs to be emphasized, similar to that of a title. Let's start writing a few header tags ourselves. Header tags are represented using the word H1, H2, H3, and H4, H5, and H6. Header 1 means that it's the most important, and header 6 means it's the least important. Let's create some boilerplate header tags. So the first one, let's say, is H1, and say this is a header tag 1. I'm going to create a second header tag and say this is a header tag 2. Let's save that information and see what shows up in the browser. When I refresh my browser, we can see that we have a header tag 1 and a header tag 2. If I create a header tag 3, do you think it'll be smaller or bigger than the header tag 2? Let's take a look. I'm going to create a header 3 tag and say this is a header tag 3. Save that information. Go back to my browser, load it, and you can see that header tag 1 is the biggest and header tag 3 is smaller. As you can see, there are different use cases for using different tags. This is great and all, but I kind of want to add some realistic examples. So say we're creating some kind of movie review website, and I just want to review one specific movie. So let's go back to the code. I'm going to remove the H1 tag and the H3 tag and maybe call this movie summary of Harry Potter. And in the P tag, I'll say this movie series was amazing. I highly would love to see it again. Let's save that. Go back to our browser. Obviously, it doesn't really make too much sense, but just showing you the purpose of the header tags versus the P tags. And then maybe we can add like a little bit of a rating system. So let's go back to our code again. And here I'm going to add another H2 tag and say this or movie rating of Harry Potter. And I'll add a P tag here. And we could say like, I gave this rating a 5 out of 5. Let's go back to our browser, refresh, and we can see instantly the code that we wrote. And it is kind of somewhat separated between the header tags and the P tags, like I said before. So this is all great and all, but if you notice, there is a little bit of like separation between what this context here is and what this context here is. I like to imagine things as containers. So this movie summary emphasis is kind of its own single container, and this movie rating of Harry Potter is a separate container. This is really important because once you start styling your website, you want to style them based on the compartments that they're located in. And in this example, what we can do is start using the div tags. The div tag defines a division or section in an HTML document. A div tag is great for compartmentalizing your text and data in different sections for code readability or independent styling purposes. I'm not going to go too in depth about styling until the next lesson, but it's always good to break down your code into separate chunks or containers if relevant. So what I'm going to do now is instead of just having just a bunch of H2 and P tags here, I'm going to add a div tag here, copy this code, and paste it inside of this div tag and push it up. I'm going to create a separate div tag here again, copy this code, and paste it here and push it up again. Let's go back to the browser and see what's changed. When I refresh the page, nothing has changed. So from a visual perspective, nothing has changed, but in terms of code readability for other developers, it's very obvious now that this is a container of its own, and this is a container of its own. Once we start styling, and say you want to do more independent styling for one container over the other, separating them by containers will make it so much easier to code in the future. There are a lot of other tags I didn't talk about, like section tags or image tags, but I highly recommend just like researching and see the use case for each one. I personally think these 3 tags are really important, not in the sense that they're used the most often, but in a way, I wanted to emphasize how tags should be separated and how it should be used. I hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you found this content useful, hit that like and subscribe. In the next lesson, we're going to be talking about CSS and how we can apply it to this specific application. Talk to you then.